A White Death by S.N. Short. Narrated by Mary. Published by Wicked Ink Publishing. Chapter 1. Joel. Present day. Joel couldn't believe his good luck. He only just graduated from university, but instead of having to pound the pavement in search of practical experience, his favorite professor had enviably handpicked Joel to accompany him on the expedition of a lifetime, up to the Great White North. This year's trek comprised a small team of professionals, whose sole purpose it was to study the effects of global warming on the northernmost part of the Earth's polar bear population. With a bachelor's degree in zoology now under his belt, Joel only dreamt that a master's in biology would someday follow. Until this very moment, he had been gearing everything towards his goal of becoming a full-fledged polar bear scientist. Some might say only pipe dreams, but the little boy who was born and raised in a remote community in northern Alberta knew better. He was blessed with a wise and caring Cree grandmother, who from a very early age instilled in him a sense of responsibility to protect the environment and its inhabitants. Unfortunately, though the corrupt powers currently governing his beautiful country didn't feel the same, but Joel hoped he might be the one to make at least a minor difference. And despite his degree being nothing more than a piece of paper, it had importance, bestowing his opinions with merit and respect finally. Greeted by Jack Frost, nipping at his nose the moment the heavy doors of the institute closed loudly behind him, Joel couldn't help but have a smile plastered on his face and a spring in his step as he exited the always impressive century-old brick buildings and grounds of the university. He was bursting at the seams with anticipation of sharing the good news with his family, especially the mother of his child. Without a doubt, Geraldine would be just as excited as he was. After all, they had given up for him to complete his degree. Case in point, Joel would be forever indebted for the altruistic kindness that Jerry's auntie showed by letting her niece and their son live under her roof throughout the duration of his schooling. However, starting today, his future belonged solely to him. He finally could fulfill his promises and begin supporting his family. Joel raced across the campus in a hurry on his way to the nearest LRT station, hoping to make it to Jerry's auntie's home within the inner city before she left for her part-time job that evening. Public transit was crowded and slow as always, but taking a cab or Uber was impossible on a limited income. Later, as the transit car's doors opened at a slow pace, Joel wasted no time in getting off and sprinting down the ice-covered streets on the last leg of his journey across the large city. His only focus was envisioning Jerry's expression when he eventually found a moment to reveal the specifics of his good luck. Although there was still one significant factor weighing heavy on his mind, and try as he might, he couldn't find a way to sugarcoat it. Right as Joel was rounding the corner to the avenue, he swiftly slowed his pace and tried to catch his breath as he joyfully caught sight of his pint-sized ladylove heading up the sidewalk in his direction. It was impossible for him to not grin as he observed her winter attire. Jerry was anything but hard to miss in her rather quirky loud ensemble, not to mention her telltale bleached blonde ponytail poking out from under her toque. Maybe because of his exuberance, or her very exhalation in such frigid temperatures, had caused a thick plume of condensation to form. Joel completely missed the perturbed look on Jerry's usually pretty face, as he swept her up into a bear hug while attempting to playfully plant a kiss on her full lips. Her almost instantaneous and incomprehensible response to his embrace utterly blindsided him, as she fought to be unhanded and then angrily spit out, "You're fucking late again." What could have caused such fury? Everything appeared seemingly copacetic when he left for school that morning. Or was her anger displaced? Now, holding her at arm's length, it quickly became apparent that something was terribly wrong between them. "Jerry, please tell me what's happened," he implored. "Whatever it is, we can fix it." She wouldn't even dignify his question with an answer, her only response being a snipe. "Let go of me. I'm gonna be late for work, something you know absolutely nothing about." Joel attempted to avoid being goaded into an argument. Evidently something caused her to rehash a much earlier bone of contention. "I'm truly sorry for whatever I did to upset you, but I have wonderful news. My professor has offered me a job." Oddly enough, this did little to satisfy his easily angered girlfriend. Maybe she didn't understand the full ramifications. "Can we at least talk about this tomorrow?" he pleaded. When she reverted her gaze, her demeanor resembled a petulant child, as she visibly stiffened her backbone, giving the distinct impression she couldn't bear to be touched by him 1 second longer. "Your son is with my aunt right now, and she would appreciate it if you took him home to your father's place," she coldly asserted. Joel was baffled, seeing as it was only a few hours since they parted. He chose not to wake her at such an early hour, so he left quietly in the dark. "Didn't you hear me? I've been offered a job. We can finally get a place of our own." Despondent, his voice audibly cracked, and he found himself unable to continue with this no-win situation. However, his mind was still going a mile a minute. Why was she not jumping for joy, but trying to pick a fight? Did someone say or do something in the meantime to make her ignore him? And why was Dinny suddenly a bother? In the end, Joel took a much-needed step back, regain his composure, and prevent their discourse from escalating into irreversible words. At first he assumed by her silence that Jerry was of the same mindset, but soon realized his error as she unashamedly saw fit to continue testing the turbulent waters. Using all her petite 5'1" frame, she simply shoved him aside, even though he towered over her, possibly to reaffirm his vulnerabilities. Because she was aware he would never raise a hand to her. Without a backward glance, Jerry briskly marched to the nearest bus stop. Regrettably, Joel continued to stare down the street after her, somewhat dumbstruck right until the moment that a city bus pulled up alongside the mother of his child. Before boarding it, Jerry turned back towards Joel, seemingly for one last look, and then smiled in a self-satisfied way prior to yelling belligerently in his general direction. "Go get your son. My aunt is sick of looking after him," and then like a cold Arctic breeze she was gone. Joel didn't know what to do. Should he run after her? But what good would it do to instigate a screaming match on public transit in front of complete strangers? He just wanted to cry, because today should have been the happiest day of his life. After all, he worked hard to achieve his degree, and he did it all on his own. He truly believed he and Jerry resolved everything. Yes, little Dinny was a big surprise, but they both agreed he should finish his university education to provide a better standard of living for his young family. Joel even moved in with his elderly father to not put a burden on Jerry's auntie, and sure, he slept over from time to time, but he never ate her food or took up space on her couch. Left to contemplate his choices, Joel couldn't ignore the fading light in the sky due to the barren tree branches overhead, as he found himself figuratively kicked to the curb. Thereupon, realizing he'd better get a move on since frostbite was a genuine possibility, and he didn't need to add that to his list of shitty things that happened today. While swiftly climbing the old wooden stairs to Jerry's auntie's strawberry box house, something he had done many times before, Joel hesitated before knocking on the front door. Was she mad at him too, or did Jerry embellish her story? It didn't take him long to realize the folly of his actions, as he stood there in the cold, stomping his feet to stay warm. Banishing all negative thoughts, he finally made his presence known by ringing the doorbell. Within a split second, Joel heard the distinct sound of someone grappling with a sticky door lock, and shortly after, a growing beam of light revealed him on the stoop. As the door to the little tract home opened further, the look greeting him was one of warmth and compassion, as opposed to Auntie Mona's alleged indignation. Not that he would even comprehend what it was supposed to resemble, for Joel never saw the woman without a warm smile on her face and genuine merriment in her heavy hooded eyes. Earlier trepidations were all but forgotten, as Dinny's sweet freckled face and unruly mop of dark brown hair now struggled to peer around the middle-aged woman's long skirt. The instant the little boy realized his father was the unannounced visitor, his smile quickly spread from ear to ear before throwing himself with abandon into Joel's arms. The pure spontaneity of his child's actions tugged at Joel's heartstrings, causing him to suddenly break into tears, frightening the poor little 5-year-old. Auntie was intuitive enough to read more into Joel's outburst, as she stepped in and took control of the situation. Whatever was going on between her niece and the girl's boyfriend, she was aware her great-nephew was much too young to be privy to the drama of his mother's life. "Dinny, honey, please step out of the way and give your father a chance to get inside where it's warm. Quickly now." If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times, we aren't paying to heat the entire blessed neighborhood." She laughed, albeit dryly, mostly for the benefit of the child, before attempting to make eye contact with Joel. However, when that plan didn't work out as intended, and the boy refused to be separated from his father's side, Auntie Mona felt compelled to adopt a more direct approach. "Dinny, would you be a good boy and run along? I have something rather important I would like to discuss with your father." Then, as an afterthought, she added, "Besides, don't you have some new superhero coloring books you've been itching to get started on?" Her words only made the child more anxious. Being as he knew from experience, whenever adults wanted you out of the room, it meant somebody was in deep doo-doo, but who? Had he himself unknowingly incurred their ire? Or was his mother at fault because she had been short with him lately, and he didn't understand why? Dinny had been truly attempting to be a good boy, not talking back to his elders, even if he didn't agree with them, and helping his auntie around the house as much as he could. Although whenever he asked his mother where she had been or why she was always late, she would jump down his throat. Sensing the boy's hesitation about leaving the room, Auntie Mona was quick to interject. "Dinny, there is nothing to be concerned about. No one is in trouble. As soon as I've finished talking with your father, he will be free to give you his full and undivided attention." Once she had the boy settled in his makeshift bedroom and preoccupied, at least for the time being, she rejoined Joel in the living room to discuss his fragile emotional state. At first she couldn't get a single word out of the young man as he sat there on the couch, staring at his hands, and then finally he opened up. "I'm here to pick up Dinny and take him back to my father's." But before he could even finish, Jerry's auntie became distraught and her voice high-pitched. "Why on earth would you do such a thing? Isn't he happy here? I know it's not the Ritz, but he has a room of his own." Right away, Joel could tell by the change in the woman's demeanor she misconstrued his words and her feelings were indeed hurt. He couldn't help but inwardly chide himself for upsetting such a gentle soul, and then, somewhat apprehensively, he divulged his earlier conversation with Jerry. "I'm so sorry, Auntie. I didn't mean to imply that Dinny was not happy here. He loves you, I love you. I just ran into Jerry on her way to work, and she was mad as a hornet. I have been taking advantage of your kind-heartedness, and for that I apologize." She did not mince her words or her feelings. "I honestly did not know she was so unhappy with me and our living situation." "Work, what are you talking about? The girl's been on benefits for months, and if she landed a job, then this is the first I'm hearing of it. And as far as that sweet little boy is concerned, he's my family too and I love him. Just leave Dinny with me for the present. There's no need to uproot the child. We'll sort this out in due time." Joel was so confused, his head hurt, but foremost he needed to address his son's living arrangements before heading off to pursue his new career. Unfortunately, he kept the kicker a secret and would be absent for months at a time. Truthfully, when he got up this morning, his thoughts were preoccupied with final exams, submission of term papers, and just looking for a job. Jerry's subsequent change of heart indeed came as a revelation, but regardless, Dinny's welfare was paramount. He still had a small window of opportunity to get all his affairs in order before leaving for an undisclosed location, somewhere north of Baffin Bay. Joel was assigned to the expedition team already in place for months, and as luck would have it, several individuals from their group quit. Regrettably, he missed out on the end of polar bear mating season, along with delayed implantation and the subsequent digging of dens by the pregnant mother bears. So during these coldest months, Joel's directive would be to assist the remaining scientists as they tracked the solitary males, and then document births once the mothers and cubs emerged. This should give him plenty of time to become acclimated, as well as familiarize himself with the local Inuit population. Joel was also keen to take part in an ongoing research project involving the mating behavior of polar bears, specifically the unique placement of scent-producing glands on the footpads of the females. Although difficult to study, popular theory dictated that in the spring, females wishing to breed would leave chemical trails on the ice as a signal for the males to follow, but this had yet to be proven beyond any doubt. Opportunities truly abound for Joel in this new environment. For example, the Inuit, who were descendants of the Tool culture, would be collaboratively working with his team. He was honored and excited to meet them, and absorb whatever wisdom they imparted during his tenure. After all, who knew more about the region's ecosystems than the brave peoples inhabiting it for centuries? Their wealth of knowledge would undoubtedly be far greater than any modern satellites transmitted, analyzed, and interpreted data. Joel would find out he was not as prepared as he first thought, since his schooling taught him a rather homogenized version of the Inuit culture. Considering their stories tended to be relayed through the generations, by spoken word alone. Fact or fiction, the indigenous peoples of the Arctic always had a rather semi-nomadic way of life, benefiting from geographical isolation, but because of climate change and decreased whaling, their independence had in time become endangered. Catalyzing the banding and migration of regional groupings north, some moving between the islands and bays seasonally to hunt game and keep their independence, while others sadly became subject to the widening jurisdiction of the federal government, who sought to exploit their homeland's riches. Zoology had taught Joel about the animal kingdom, but words on a page were merely that. He would need to heed the members of his team, his elders, and not neglect the aspects of oneself, mind, body, and spirit. Not to mention, he would need to be ever conscious of his new surroundings, specifically regarding the extreme weather he would now experience, and the fact exposed skin could literally freeze in only a matter of minutes. Suddenly, and for no apparent reason, a foreboding 1700s quote came to mind. "Our mother feedeth thus our little life, that we may in turn feed her with our death." Later that night, as Joel lay awake in bed, all he thought about was Jerry and their son. He desperately needed to talk to her and find out what exactly had precipitated her earlier outburst. Current circumstances aside, they frequently talked at length about his future dream job after completing university, albeit no one could have ever foreseen it coming to fruition so quickly. In fact, Joel was still somewhat in shock. He always presumed that only after years of applying himself at a zoo or animal shelter, one day he might observe the objects of his fascination in their natural habitat. Everything that he had done since finding out that Jerry was carrying their baby was for his family's future, and not a flight of fancy, as his mother used to say. Although Joel knew whatever happened between them as a couple, Dinny would be looked after in his absence by people who genuinely cared for his well-being. Try as he might to remain positive and focus on the fact that tomorrow was a new day, his thoughts kept returning to his son, and on how he was going to maintain their connection over the miles that would soon separate them. He truly hoped a video call would suffice, and that once he settled into his new job and proved his worth, he could arrange for Dinny to be flown up north for a brief visit, instead of him coming home. It would be wonderful to get the chance to see everything through his child's eyes. After all, he was getting older. Really, how much trouble could he possibly be? Chapter 2. Joel. The following morning, Joel joined his elderly father for an early cup of coffee and a much-needed heart-to-heart. However, whilst staring across the old arborite tabletop in their tiny little kitchen, Joel couldn't help but notice just how much his father aged over the last couple of years. Sure, he was no longer a spring chicken, but he always was a very imposing figure and a pillar of strength within their family. At first, his father seemed not at all surprised by Jerry's attitude. It was common knowledge just what he thought of her as trashy. But when Joel explained he never found the time to inform her about his upcoming living arrangements, the older gentleman was there for him to commiserate. "Dad, I will not ask you what you would do in my shoes since you've never liked Geraldine, but do you think I'm being selfish?" His father seemed to weigh his answer before speaking. "It's no secret I thought she trapped you by getting pregnant, but that's neither here nor there. You epitomized the pride of our community, kind-hearted, smart, athletic, and easy on the eye. You took after your old man all right." He laughed uproariously, but unfortunately it spun into a loud, wet cough. Alarmed, Joel jumped up from the table and began looking frantically around the room for a box of Kleenex. To which his father responded by nonchalantly removing his faithful old hanky from his pants pocket and wiping the blood-tinged spittle off of his lower lip. "That scholarship you won most certainly set you up for bigger and better things. Truthfully, I would have been very disappointed if you stayed put and wasted the chance you had been given. Your mother would be so proud, God rest her soul. And about your mother, when are you going to grow your hair back, son? The time for mourning is long over?" In the end, no one could argue the years of living apart had most certainly been hard on Geraldine because she had been the primary caregiver for their child, but it wasn't like they had never discussed a future together. With his heart in his mouth, Joel concluded he needed to have that face-to-face with Jerry as soon as possible. He had a deep understanding that an opportunity of this magnitude would not come around again, despite not wanting to lose his family or his new job. As the morning hours ticked by, Joel kept glancing at his phone and willing for it to ring, but by lunchtime he had still not heard a word from her, not even a text. She should be up by now, since most night shifts end around 4 or 5 in the morning. That's if she was telling the truth. Finally he reached a point where waiting was no longer possible, so throwing caution to the wind, Joel headed over to Auntie Mona's house, hoping to catch Jerry in a better frame of mind to talk. As he again stood on the stoop of her auntie's home, gathering the nerve to ring her doorbell, all Joel could think about was getting on with his life, which included having a wonderfully fulfilling career and his family all under the same roof. When halfway through his not-so-pleasant reverie, the front door swung open and there was Jerry, looking a tad worse for wear and definitely not her usual coiffed self. Reaching out in a well-meaning attempt to hug her, he couldn't help but notice the pungent smell of alcohol on her, as he closed the distance between the two of them. Joel didn't want to start their conversation off with a fight. For all he knew, she might have gone out with a girlfriend after work for a drink to discuss her woes, but sadly, the cold shoulder she presented him with was more than clear. "Can we talk? I'm so sorry about yesterday, but I have so much to tell you. Everything is happening so fast, and I need your input." Again he tried to take a step forward, but this time only to gain entrance to the home, and Jerry unexpectedly blocked him with her outstretched arm. Joel would never forget how she nervously looked around, as if she was worried someone might overhear their conversation. With venom in her eyes she just spit it all out, "We're fucking through. I've found someone else, and he's going to take care of me and Dinny. I'm moving, so chase your stupid little dreams." Joel couldn't believe what he just heard. Where was this coming from? What if anything had changed in the last 36 hours? He was gobsmacked by her total disregard for his feelings. Was their relationship a charade, and she had been leading him on for all these years while waiting for something better to come along? Had she ever even loved him? When had she started sleeping around? Had there been signs, red flags, and he had been too stupid to see them, or was he so caught up in his career and she had only been window dressing for his goal? Who was really to blame for this deception? "How long have you felt this way, and why on earth didn't you tell me?" Joel struggled to maintain his equanimity. He was not a violent man, but he could not keep his voice from getting louder and louder. The cacophony caused Dinny to become alerted to his father's presence. He ran to the front door to greet him, only to be confronted by his parents yelling match. The little boy was unaware of how to handle the situation, since this was unfamiliar territory for him, as he had never witnessed such anger and hatred directed at another person in his short life. Dinny's instant response was to break out into great hiccuping sobs. At first he didn't seem to know which parent to turn to for solace, then decided on his mother's embrace. "Look what you've done. Dinny will be much better off in a normal home. Chris will make a great father," and as those words left her mouth, Joel felt completely gutted. Jerry had been making plans for her future for some time now. How could she share 2 men's beds and look at herself in the mirror? Was Dinny even his? He so wanted to voice his assumptions right there and then, but not in front of Dinny. He loved his son, and only wanted what was best for him. Turning to go, he looked back at Jerry and growled 2 words before leaving: "Joint custody." As the door slammed shut behind him, Joel was positive that he heard Jerry's shrill voice saying something about, "Over my dead body," and she was going to make him pay. Again, left out in the cold to gather his thoughts, the only thing that he could think about was contacting legal aid, and thankfully he had friends at school that might help. Upon arrival at the hallowed halls of the university, Joel was quick to make his way to the Faculty of Law, and in no time flat, he was spilling his guts to a childhood friend who was studying at the same school. He knew Anita since grade 1, and when they both left the small town they grew up in to further their educations, as luck would have it, they promised to always stay in touch. Joel had also been fortunate that his father had likewise moved to the same city, but sadly it was because of his ever-deteriorating health. Anita had been a good family friend, and spent many a joyous evening around Joel's father's table. So much so his father expressed admiration for the girl, and in his own humble opinion, she would make a mighty fine wife for some lucky man. It didn't hurt either that Anita was downright voluptuous, not scrawny like Geraldine. However, Joel did not have the heart to tell him that Anita was also too spirited, and definitely not interested in him that way. Thankfully, after hearing all the sordid details pertaining to Joel's relationship woes, Anita could put his mind at ease. "You have rights, you know. That scunnagoose can't just take your kid away." She reassured Joel that Jerry slipped up big time by mentioning she was going to make him pay. After all, she wouldn't have said that if Dinny was not his biological son. Unfortunately, time was not on his side. Joel needed to organize his affairs pronto, and although Anita's specialty wasn't family law, she thankfully knew someone that could help. With only a couple of weeks before Joel's looming departure date, Anita's friend turned out to be a godsend. Besides treating him like family, she assured Joel a custody agreement could be drafted and at the very least filed with the courts, thus making it damn near impossible for his ex to move away with the child while he was working up north. So with those worries put to rest, Joel could now focus his energies on getting ready for his very first expedition, and luckily for him, almost all of his gear would be provided by the university and backing company. Large conglomerates loved to put their logo on anything that looked planet-friendly, and fortunately, the one that was funding his research had yet to be discovered doing anything underhanded by the mass media. Plus, it didn't hurt that they were prepared to pay their scientists half up front before even leaving shore, since they would be away for such long periods of time and bills don't pay themselves. Joel was beyond ecstatic to give his father some money in order to lessen his burden, as well as give Anita's friend a retainer to look after his interests while he was away. As the big day drew nearer, Jerry did not contact Joel or even make good on any of her earlier threats. And when he called her auntie to arrange a last visit with Dinny before leaving the province, Mona was cordial, and reiterated her displeasure with her niece's earlier actions. "I don't know what's wrong with that girl. Frankly, nothing has ever been good enough for her. Mark my words, she'll be sorry if she lets you get away." It was as if she was oblivious to the fact Jerry had been making plans to marry someone other than himself. On that last day, as Joel arrived at Geraldine's aunt's home, a feeling of melancholy, and almost longing for the happiness he had mistakenly thought to have shared with Geraldine, suddenly overcame him. However, he soon regained his senses, and felt relieved she had not been there to cause a scene, allowing him to spend the whole day together with his son. They ended up going to the big mall to play games, eat junk food and ride rides, not necessarily in that order. Just hearing his son's laughter and ceaseless nonsensical chatter meant so much to Joel. He couldn't help but stare at the child in wonder because he could plainly see himself. With great sadness he had to say goodbye to Dinny later that evening, promising him he would stay in touch. "You be a good boy and look after your mother and auntie, and I'll be back when the snow is gone." Then with tears in his eyes, he kissed the little boy goodbye and presented Mona with a new cell phone and cash-laden envelope. And as he slowly walked down her front steps on his way to the darkened street, Joel made the mistake of turning around one last time to wave. There was his little man being restrained by his auntie as he reached for his father with his free arm. "Please don't leave me too, Daddy," he sobbed. Chapter 3. Yuki. November 1919. Nunavut, formerly known as Rupert's Land and the Northwestern Territory. Night was falling quickly as Yuki huddled between the snow-covered rocks and large windrows of debris on the shoreline, hoping for some reprieve from the ever-blowing north winds. It was hours since her so-called brethren left her to freeze to death on an ice floe, and thankfully, they left in such a hurry they had not bothered to collect her discarded clothes after violating her. Not to mention the fact her hands were now almost useless, and ached incessantly from the extreme cold. But at least the bleeding stopped from what little remained of the fingers they hurriedly amputated, in some vengeful reenactment of a childhood tale. In this her time of solitude she reflected on her life to comprehend where it had all gone wrong, all the while pacing back and forth trying to keep warm. To begin with, Yuki experienced a very hard start in life. Story has it she was abandoned on the edge of a small formation of land-fast ice as an infant, left to the mercy of the elements, with only a soiled animal hide wrapped around her tiny body. Call it fate or intervening spirits, when a group of Inuit hunters chanced upon the distraught cries of a forsaken child. Given the practice of adoption had always been an intricate part of their culture, these good men could not ignore the gift of life they had been entrusted with, no matter the parentage. Being as their charge was a newborn, a connection or bond with its new parents would undoubtedly be easier to secure. By the same token, the child would also hopefully take on the blood memories, which the Inuit have always known to be true, of their adopted family. The selfless tradition aimed to strengthen kinship alliances, but more importantly, it contributed to ensuring the survival of the community. Under certain circumstances, such as times of famine, infanticide would not have been an unusual occurrence, especially where female children were concerned. However, people thought her discovery was attributable to a cruel act of vengeance upon an unfaithful wife for copulating with a Kayunak, a white person. Overall, the child's characteristics resembled those of an Inuk, but her skin and eye color were tragically too pale to evade scrutiny. Although in due course and with daily exposure to the sun's rays reflecting off an almost never-ending sea of white, she grew to look much like her adopted kin. They named her Yuki for the survivor she was, and in no time at all, she deftly embraced the culture of her new people. Granted, her journey was not without its trials and tribulations, especially for learning the traditional life skills of an Inuk woman. Yuki was obstinate to say the least, and tomboyish in her ways, qualities that gave rise over time to the rather standoffish coexistence she shared with the other women in their community. Whereas the young men and boys found her to be quite intriguing from the get-go, but regrettably, her insatiable hunger for acquiring and mastering new skills proved to be a large contributing factor in alienating her from them as well. Her adopted brothers could not bear losing to or being seen as inferior to a female, especially a pretty one. Thankfully, though, in due course, the community's welfare won out over hurt feelings, as Yuki developed into an indisputably skilled hunter, and was later bestowed the honor of teaching the younger generations her skill set. The elders revered her status, as they trusted only her to pay proper respect to all of her kills, and thus ensure the spirit of the animal would return in another, one that would sacrifice its life again. The Inuit elders believed this to be a significant matter, because they feared that if they didn't perform the ritual correctly, the animal's spirit could come back as a demon and terrorize their people. Yuki also excelled in training the community's dogs to sniff out seal air holes in the ice, and many nights she slept with them, as opposed to spending time in the company of eligible kinsmen. This too added to the frequent gossip spewing around the communal campfires, while the other women were preparing meals of the freshly killed meat. The group flourished in the Arctic on a steady diet of whales, walrus, caribou, seal, polar bears, muskoxen, birds, and fish. Yuki was happy and slept well, knowing that when she passed into the realm of the ancestral shades, it would most likely be with spear in hand. It wasn't until she was into her early 20s that she first experienced heartbreak following the loss of a true friend, someone much like herself, for Alornark too danced to the beat of his own drum. He was a respected elder in their community, but had never taken a wife, and from the moment that he laid eyes on the helpless, abandoned child all those years ago, he had become her mentor, the grandfather she never had. On that ill-fated day they had been out with a large hunting party, and even though their bounty was rich, several of the younger men were just not satisfied, and wanted to stay out longer, hoping to find a certain polar bear that was rumored to be of exceptional size and had a taste for sled dogs. Yuki heard those same rumors too, but she knew them for what they were, and trophy hunting was something that went against her nature. As the day wore on and darkness was fast approaching, the hunting party set up camp for the night to avoid getting caught out on an ice floe with the sleds after dusk. The younger men had the audacity to consider Yuki as their camp cook, because she was the only female in the group. However, thankfully, her dear friend Alornark stepped up and demanded all the hunters contribute. Later that night, with bellies full of fresh seal meat, an unexpected winter storm descended upon them, and the hunting party was forced to secure everything and turn in early. No one took the time to inspect the camp before lights out, in order to make sure nothing had been left out that would attract the unwanted attention of the local wildlife. As the outside temperature plummeted, the hunters were thankful for the protection of their hide tents, and the fact that their cramped sleeping quarters resulted in a rather soporific effect. Tragically, though, the sound of barking dogs and fierce growling interrupted their peaceful slumber, even over the white noise of the never-ending north winds. Yuki recognized the sound of a polar bear, but still habitually looked to her mentor Alornark for confirmation. "You know what to do," was all the old hunter replied, and then nodded his head as if handing the reins over to her. Yuki hesitated slightly before clearing her throat. "Brothers, arm yourselves with bow and spear. Do not shoot until you see your target." The next sound she heard was the mournful cries of several of her sled dogs in distress. With no thought as to her fellow hunters awaiting her further instructions, she threw caution to the wind and was out of the tent flap ahead of the rest of her party. Luckily, the polar night was not upon them just yet, as it varied by latitudes, a phenomenon where the sun is below the horizon all day and can last anywhere from 24 hours to 179 days at the poles. But because of the severity of the storm, visibility had become almost non-existent. As Yuki ran blindly toward the baying dogs, she was tackled from behind. Thankfully, someone thought with his head and not his heart. After all, Alornark was a seasoned hunter, and knew better than to get between a polar bear and its quarry. Almost immediately, their fellow hunters rejoined them in a huddle, but when Yuki tried once again to take the lead, her orders fell on deaf ears. "Forgive me, I wasn't thinking straight. We need to plan our approach, but keep in mind the safety of our sled dogs because from the sounds of it, they have already whipped that animal up into a frenzy. Whoever is first to get within shooting range, try to stand fast, or at least until someone else can back you up. No one wants to be charged by an angry bear." Yuki wasn't sure if it was the loud howling of the wind, or the single-mindedness of the younger hunters, because they only seemed interested in being the first to take down the large beast, and not at all concerned with the welfare of the group's dogs. "We're wasting time, woman. Some of those dogs are already dead. You heard him. Get a move on. I'm not missing out on a chance to kill that bear all because of you. Who's with me?" Their angry yelling voices bombarded Yuki, and it took all of Alornark's energy to hold her back, as the young hunters charged recklessly toward the life-and-death confrontation, distinguishable only by the terrifying sound of growls and barking over the wind and now horizontally blowing snow. "Why did you just let them leave?" she screamed at Alornark. Alornark was a man of few words for as long as she could remember, so it only took a deep frown to crease his weathered brow for the realization to finally set in, and common sense to prevail. Yuki begrudgingly returned to the tents in search of torches. Once found, they headed back in the direction the rest of their hunting party had gone. In no time at all, the sound of men's raised voices and jubilant shouting made them cognizant of their party's location. As they soon after surveyed the bloody scene, it was quite clear the hunters had not bothered to ensure their aim was true before throwing their spears or shooting their arrows. There on the ice amongst the dead and dying bodies of her beloved Kimi dogs was the prone body of the biggest polar bear Yuki ever laid eyes on. The poor creature's beautiful white fur was now streaked with red. She noticed several spears still protruding from its hide, and the bodies of her faithful sled dogs. Yuki didn't know what to do first. She wanted so badly to punish the young men, lash out at them for their blatant contempt for protocol. They knew better. But after seeing the smug looks on their faces and witnessing the general air of celebration, it was more than evident they were oblivious to any wrongdoings, or they just didn't care. In that moment, she needed to focus her energy on the task at hand, and try to block out their childish rhetoric. "Can you believe the sheer size of that animal? Never saw anything like it before. He just kept on coming, swiping those dogs out of the way with his massive paws. I wonder how old it was. Shame about the hide, though. Does anyone know who dealt the killing blow? It will make a great story to tell around the campfire." As Yuki stoically endeavored to hold back her tears, she approached the bodies that lay strewn all over the ice, hoping to find at least a few of her dogs she could save. Even in the reduced visibility of the blowing snow and varying degrees of darkness, her keen eyes caught sight of a large trail of blood coming from the direction of the tents. On closer inspection by torchlight, she could make out bits and pieces of the butchered seal they had for supper earlier in the evening. Yuki immediately saw red, as everything fell into place. She swung around quickly to face her fellow hunters, intending to gain retribution, but the sound of a lone dog whining loudly in pain regrettably waylaid her. As soon as she located the source of the mournful cry, Yuki ran to its aid, paying no heed to the fact it was in very close proximity to the downed polar bear. Then everything happened all at once, as the huntress laid down her spear on the ice, before kneeling to get a better look at the animal's injuries. The great bear suddenly became reanimated, and struggled to gain its footing. But Alornark's ever-watchful eyes were the first to witness the inception, understand the events as pure bedlam ensued and took action. Unlike the younger hunters, he had years of experience behind him and reacted accordingly. With spear in hand, Alornark launched himself at the bear as it strove to stand in an upright position. An injured animal will not always act as one would think. The immense bear let out an angry bawl and turned around, catching Alornark midair in its deadly embrace. Startled, Yuki fell backwards the moment the animal reared above her and could only watch in abject horror as her friend was being crushed to death in front of her. She was unable to move or speak, but miraculously regained her motor skills in time to grab her spear and throw it with all of her might at the side of the bear's chest. The point of her weapon connected with the animal's lungs as hoped, and downed the bear for good. Looking back on that evening, Yuki wasn't sure if she was responsible for her friend's death, as the other hunters unanimously claimed. It would have been up to them to ensure the animal was, in fact, dead, by poking and prodding it with their spears before anyone approached. She took a chance by aiming so close to the bear's front leg, but the sheer power of its initial embrace was most likely culpable.